The morning began like any other across Earth, and people walked to work and children laughed on their way to school while the sky above was a perfect clear blue. But in just a few heartbeats, everything changed as the light dimmed and the warmth faded. First, it felt like a passing cloud had covered the sun. Yet when people looked up, their mouths opened in shock because an enormous dark shape was moving across the heavens. So massive, it covered the sun completely and turned the day into a strange, cold twilight. Across cities and villages, the temperature dropped and shadows stretched unnaturally long. The object was not a meteor nor a cloud, but something far greater. A ship so large it looked endless, with jagged edges and glowing lines running along its sides like veins of molten gold. Its sheer size made mountains look small and oceans feel tiny. Silence fell as everyone stared because it felt alive somehow, as if it was watching them back. News cameras turned upward, soldiers scrambled to their stations, and governments across the world made frantic calls to one another. But before anyone could decide what to do, something happened that no human had ever experienced before. Without warning, every machine, every device, every screen, every engine went dead. Cars stopped in the middle of the roads. Airplanes stalled in the skies and began to fall. Hospital machines went silent. The world's heartbeat seemed to stop as power grids collapsed and people screamed in confusion. Then came the voice. It did not come from the sky or from any speaker. It came from inside their own heads, deep and cold and calm. It said, "Earth belongs to us now. You will serve, you will obey." It was not a request, it was a command. The voice seemed to echo inside the bones. And in that moment, every person felt smaller than they had ever felt before. Somewhere deep underground in a reinforced bunker. Far from the cities, a man named Elias Ward sat frozen in front of a dead computer screen. He was an astrophysicist who had spent years studying distant galaxies. He knew about alien theories and strange anomalies in space, but nothing could have prepared him for this. What shook him the most was not the size of the ship or the sudden silence of the machines, but the voice itself, because he recognized it, not the exact words, but the pattern, the tone. In his private research, Elias had found records in ancient star charts and alien ruins buried beneath the sands of Egypt that spoke of a race wiped out 10,000 years ago, a race that was not supposed to exist anymore. Yet the voice was exactly as described in those impossible records. This meant one thing: something that should be dead was now above Earth. Outside the bunker, the ship moved slowly, and its surface shimmered with strange lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. Smaller shapes began to emerge from its underside, dozens of them, then hundreds. They glided soundlessly through the cold air. People on the ground pointed and shouted. Some ran while others simply stood frozen as the shapes descended into the streets. They were tall, robed figures with polished metal masks that hid their faces completely. No one could tell if they were alive or machines. They walked in perfect unison without sound, and everywhere they went, humans stopped resisting. Some collapsed. In fear, others simply stared as if trapped in invisible chains. Elias knew that whatever these beings were, they were not here to talk. They were here to take. He thought of the voice again, and a cold realization filled him. It was searching, not for gold or land, but for someone. The voice had scanned the minds of billions in seconds, and he could feel it lingering near his own mind as if tasting it. The idea terrified him more than death itself. The ship above began to rotate slowly, and from its side, a massive glowing symbol appeared in the clouds. No human had seen it before. Yet somehow everyone understood its meaning. Ownership. The world was no longer free. In that instant, Elias understood that the voice and the ship were connected to something far away, something hidden beyond the stars, and whatever had brought them here was not just an invasion, it was a return, and returns are always more dangerous than arrivals because they come with memory and revenge. As he stood in the cold, dim light of the bunker, Elias thought of one question that burned hotter than his fear. If this alien race died long ago, then who is really controlling the ship above? The tall masked figures moved through the cities without hurry, as if they already knew no one could stop them, and whenever a human tried to run or fight, they would raise one long, pale hand and touch the person's forehead. For only a second, after which the person's eyes turned glassy and their face went blank, and they would simply walk away in silence, no longer themselves. The news called them overseers, but no one knew their real name, and no one had seen what was behind the mask. In every major city, strange new towers began to rise, built from black metal that shimmered like oil in sunlight, and the work was done not by the overseers, but by humans who had been touched and emptied. They moved with mechanical precision, never speaking. In less than 2 weeks, the towers filled the skylines of Earth, and no one knew their purpose. Underground in the hidden bunker, Elias Ward sat with a small group of survivors who called themselves the Last Signal. They were hackers, engineers, and scientists who had managed to keep a few systems running by shielding them from whatever power the aliens had used to kill electronics. One of them, a woman named Kara, had managed to tap into a faint signal being broadcast from the towers, and what they found made the room go silent. The towers were not factories or weapons, they were amplifiers sending a constant stream of data back into space. Elias stared at the readout and recognized the pattern immediately. It matched the signature of the voice that had spoken in every mind. These towers were part of a larger network, and they were transmitting control instructions. It was not just humans being controlled. Elias realized with a growing chill that the overseers themselves were only receivers, machines, or maybe bodies being operated remotely from somewhere far away. He explained to the others that the data was coming from a single source beyond the galaxy, from a star system that had been dead for thousands of years. Kara frowned and asked if that was even possible, and Elias told her it should not be possible, but it was happening. Another member of the group, a former soldier named Rourke, slammed his fist on the table and said, if the source was dead, then this had to be a trick. But Elias shook his head and told them there was something worse. If the source was dead and still sending commands, then they were not dealing with living invaders. They were dealing with something preserved, something ancient, something that could not die. While they argued, a sudden tremor shook the bunker, dust falling from the ceiling and a low hum filling the air. The lights flickered and the air itself seemed to thicken as if invisible hands were pressing down on them. Elias felt a strange pulling, sensation in his head, and realized the voice was back, not speaking this time, but searching. It was moving through the minds in the bunker one by one, like a hand rifling through a box of memories, and when it reached him, it stopped. He could feel its focus like a hot beam on the back of his skull. And then came a whisper, not to his ears, but deep in his mind. You will come to us. The sensation vanished, but Elias was shaking and Kara saw it. Before he could speak, alarms blared, and security cameras showed overseers moving through the tunnels toward their position. The group scrambled to grab what little gear they had, but Rourke stayed by the console trying to trace the signal before they had to flee. Elias grabbed his arm and told him it was too late, but Rourke snarled that this was their only chance to know where the enemy truly was. Then the feed went white and the door exploded inward. Blinding light filled the room and the towering masked. Figures stepped inside, moving with slow, deliberate steps. One of them reached for Elias, and the same mind-crushing wave of pressure filled his head. He tried to fight it, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with bare hands. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Kara being dragged away and Rourke shouting his name. When Elias woke, he was no longer in the bunker or even on Earth. Cold air bit at his skin and strange, dim blue light surrounded him. He was lying on a smooth, black floor inside a vast chamber that curved upward, like the inside of a sphere. Above him, the ceiling rippled with what looked like liquid stars, and in the distance, tall figures moved silently between massive pillars carved with symbols he almost recognized from his research. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning, and that whatever had brought him here had no intention of letting him go. Elias slowly sat up, his head pounding as if 1,000 whispers had been pressed into his mind, and the chamber around him felt impossibly large, with its walls fading into shadow. The air was cold, but carried a faint metallic taste, and the strange, blue glow came from veins of light running along the black floor like rivers of energy. He could see the tall, masked overseers moving in perfect unison, their footsteps soundless, as they carried strange silver crates toward an enormous gate at the far end of the room. The gate shimmered as if made of liquid glass, and beyond it was only darkness. Elias tried to stand, but his legs shook, and before he could take a step, the voice came again, not loud, but so close it was like it was inside his heartbeat. "You are the one we seek. It said you will open the way." He asked aloud, though no one else was near what way. And the answer came not as words, but as images in his mind. A vision of a vast, dead world orbiting a star that had burned out. Long ago, its surface covered in broken cities and silent towers that stretched into a black sky. Something buried deep beneath those ruins pulsed with an ancient rhythm, a signal older than Earth itself. The images faded, and Elias gasped. The gate at the far end seemed to react to the vision, its surface rippling faster. An overseer approached him, holding a device shaped like a crown made of thin black metal. Elias stepped back, but invisible hands wrapped around his arms and forced him still. The crown was placed on his head, and the moment it touched him, the chamber vanished. He was standing in the middle of a city not his own. A city built from impossible architecture that twisted like frozen smoke. The streets were empty, but he could feel eyes on him from every shadow. A tall figure stepped out from the darkness, wearing no mask, its face pale and sharp, its eyes like shards of burning ice. "This is not real," Elias whispered, and the figure smiled, not with lips, but with the shift of the air around it. It told him, "This is the mind. This is where I touch you." The figure called itself Vera, and said she was once the ruler of 1,000 worlds, before the architects destroyed her kind. She claimed her body had died, but her mind had been preserved as pure thought drifting through the void, until Earth's signal long ago had reached her broken world and awakened her. Elias felt her words like a cold wind through his bones. She said the overseers were her hands, the towers, her voice. But she needed a key to unlock her full strength, and his mind was that key. She explained that his rare genetic pattern allowed him to hold the core signal without being destroyed by it. With it, she could command every mind on Earth, and beyond, Elias told her he would never help her. And she only tilted her head and said, "You will when you see what comes next." And the city dissolved around him, replaced by the image of Earth burning under a rain of fire ships, unlike hers, dark and jagged, tearing through the skies. She said these were the architects, and they had seen her awakening. They would come to erase not only her, but the planet that had called her back. She told him he had two choices: join her and survive under her rule, or refuse and watch Earth die when the vision ended. Elias was back in the chamber, the crown still on his head, the overseers standing motionless as if waiting for a command. He realized with dread that the crown was not just showing him visions. It was also sending his thoughts back to Vera. Every doubt, every fear, every memory was being read. He tried to think of nothing but the cold floor under his hands, but the voice slipped in again, softer this time, like a promise. "Help me, and you will. Save them, help me, and your world will live." Elias knew that whatever decision he made would change not just the fate of Earth, but the fate of the stars. And yet somewhere deep in his mind, a part of him wondered if the choice had already been made for him. The moment the ship blotted out the sun, Elias stood in the center of the great chamber, the crown still clinging to his head, like it had grown into his skin, the overseers standing like statues around him, their masks reflecting the cold blue light. He felt a sudden pulling sensation, and the floor beneath him began to sink, as if he was standing on a platform that descended through layers of the ship. The air grew colder, the light dimmer until they reached a vast underground hall, so large it felt like it could hold an entire city. At its center was a pit of swirling silver mist, and above it hung thousands of bodies suspended in glowing threads. Humans, aliens, and strange creatures he had never seen, all floating with closed eyes, their chests rising and falling in slow, unnatural rhythm. Wires and tubes ran into their skulls, connecting them to the ship. Elias's breath caught when he saw Kara among them, her body limp, her face calm, as if she was dreaming he wanted to run to her. But invisible hands froze him in place. The voice of Vera filled the chamber, and though he could not see her body, he felt her presence everywhere she told him. These were her voices, her eyes, her memory. They were the network through which she ruled every captured mind, a piece of her strength, and soon he would join them, not as a puppet, but as the center. The core, she said. The architects would arrive soon, their ships faster than light, their weapons made to burn stars to ash. If she was not at her full strength, they would kill her and turn Earth into dust. She spoke of the time before her death, when she ruled worlds and bent empires to her will, and how the architects had feared her knowledge of the great signal, a power older than the universe itself that could weave thought into reality. She claimed the architects were not saviors, but jailers who locked away anything too powerful to control. Elias listened, but his thoughts were not on her history. They were on the fact that Kara and countless others were trapped in this web, their minds being drained. He asked why she needed him when she already had so many, and she replied that all these others were fragments, her song scattered across too many voices. But he could hold it whole, one mind strong enough to carry the full melody of control. He said she was insane, and she answered, perhaps, but power does not care for sanity. The silver mist in the pit began to churn, and from its depths a shape rose. A figure made of light and shadow, forming a tall body with the same sharp, pale face he had seen in the vision. Vera stepped forward, her feet never touching the floor, her eyes burning like frozen suns. She circled him, her gaze piercing through every thought, and told him that his resistance only delayed the inevitable. The platform beneath him tilted, and he found himself pulled toward the pit, the glowing threads reaching for him like living tendrils. He struggled, but the invisible force dragged him closer. Then a sudden crackle of static burst in his ear, and he heard Rourke's voice, faint but urgent, telling him they had found a way into the ship through one of the unfinished towers. They had planted charges near the power core, and were going to blow it in minutes. Elias's heart pounded. He realized that if the core was destroyed, the network might collapse, freeing everyone, but it might also kill Kara and the others instantly. Vera seemed to sense the message, her head snapping toward him, her voice turning cold and sharp. She told him that if the core died, her enemies would win, and they would burn everything, including him. She offered him a final choice: stand with her and command the overseers to destroy the resistance, or stand against her and watch Earth become a graveyard. The threads brushed against his skin, cold and electric, and he could feel his memories being pulled one by one, the laughter of his childhood, the first time he looked through a telescope the day his parents died, all of it slipping away into her control. He closed his eyes and thought of Kara, thought of the billions who could no longer think for themselves, and for the first time, he felt something push back inside his mind, not against her, but toward her. A strange warmth, like a key turning in a lock. And he realized she was right about one thing: he was different. The threads recoiled slightly, as if burned, and Vera's eyes widened. She said softly, "Yes, you will." Do, and in that moment he knew she would never let him go alive. The hum of the ship deepened, and Elias could feel the vibration in his bones as Vera's eyes locked onto him, her expression unreadable, her voice calm, but edged with something sharp like a blade. She told him the architects were already on their way, their war fleets cutting through the void, and that every second he hesitated brought them closer. She said he could save billions now, or let them all burn in the fire of the enemy. He asked what saving meant to her, and she smiled in a way that made the air colder. It meant kneeling. It meant Earth would live, but never be free. The silver threads curled toward him again, but before they could touch his skin, the crown on his head pulsed with a faint flicker. Not from Vera, but from somewhere. Else his ears filled with static, and then Rourke's voice came again louder this time, telling him they had breached the lower decks and planted charges at the main energy conduits they would detonate in 8 minutes. Kara was still in the network, but they had a plan to pull her out if they could cut the control flow. Elias's heart raced, because he knew the plan was dangerous if they miscalculated by even seconds. The shock would kill everyone. Linked to Vera, Rourke told him there was still time to choose whether the signal went down clean or dirty. Elias opened his mouth to answer, but Vera stepped closer, her eyes burning brighter. She said, "I can hear him too." She raised her hand, and the overseers in the chamber turned toward the walls where the sound of distant fighting echoed. The ship's black floor shook with each explosion. She told Elias this was the moment to decide whether he was the savior of his people or their executioner. She promised him a place beside her, not as a prisoner, but as a ruler commanding not only the overseers, but the billions of minds they controlled. She said together, they could crush the architects forever and take their worlds. Elias asked, what would happen to Earth's people? If he refused, she gave no answer. Only silence, and that silence was heavier than any word. The crown on his head tightened, and images poured into his mind, visions of him standing beside her on the bridge of a vast fleet, stars bending to their will, planets kneeling without a fight. But there were other visions, too. Unbidden ones from his own heart of Earth burning under alien fire, the sky split with explosions. Kara's lifeless body falling through the silver mist, the images tangled until he could no longer tell which were hers and which were his. The floor shook harder now, Rourke's voice shouting that they had 5 minutes left and needed his signal to trigger the extraction. The overseers moved toward the doors, their long limbs shifting like liquid metal. Vera reached out her hand, her voice now almost gentle, saying, "Elias, the choice is already made. You just have to see it." He thought of the first day the sky went dark, the sound of that voice filling the minds of every person on Earth. The helplessness he had felt in that moment, and the quiet rage that had grown since then. He realized he could not give her the core signal, because once she had it, there would be no escape for anyone, not even him. But if he sided with the resistance, now there was still a chance. Even if it was small, he took a slow breath and said one word into the calm. Now then everything happened at once. The crown flared with blinding light, the floor beneath them cracked, and a shockwave ripped through the chamber. The silver threads above shivered and snapped. One by one, bodies began to fall from the air, their eyes fluttering open in confusion. Kara dropped to her knees, gasping for breath. Overseers jerked and stumbled like puppets, with cut strings. Vera's eyes widened in fury, the chamber screaming with the sound of metal tearing. She reached for Elias, but he was already running toward Kara, pulling her to her feet. Explosions shook the walls, the liquid star ceiling dripping. Down in bright, burning drops, Vera's voice roared inside his skull, promising that this choice would doom them all as he dragged Kara toward the exit. Rourke's voice shouted coordinates for the escape corridor 3 decks down. Overseers still under Vera's control began to reform, blocking their path. The air thick with smoke and heat, and somewhere far above them the deep groan of the ship's hull breaking apart filled the dark, like the growl of something ancient waking from its sleep. The ship was dying around them, corridors buckling under the force of explosions, and the distant roar of fire eating its way through the decks. Elias half-carried Kara as they ran, following Rourke's shouted directions through the comm every turn, bringing them closer to the lower hangar, but also closer to the deep pull of Vera's voice in his mind. She was not gone. Her presence pressed against his thoughts, like a storm pressing against glass. She told him the architects had arrived, and that without her, they would tear the planet apart. He burst into the hangar just in time to see the black wall at the far end ripple and split open, revealing the endless dark of space beyond and far in the distance, shapes like jagged knives. Glowing with pale light streaking toward them, they were fast, impossibly fast. The architects' war fleet cutting through the void with trails of burning silver behind them. Rourke appeared from behind a stack of alien crates, his armor scorched his. Face grim, he tossed Elias a small black device, the trigger for the final charges. Elias looked at it knowing that pressing it would finish the ship and end Vera's hold on the planet, but also strip away the only force that might slow the architects. Vera's voice came again sharper now, laced with desperation, saying, "Elias, you do not understand. They will not stop at me. They will unmake everything. I will give you the core signal. You will lead, and no one will dare touch your world." Her words filled his head with visions of the architect's ships burning to ash, under his command of the overseers kneeling before him. Of Earth safe, but bound by his will. Kara gripped his arm, her voice shaking, telling him not to listen, that Vera's freedom would mean slavery for everyone forever. The hangar shook as part of the ceiling collapsed, a piece of burning debris slamming into the floor between them and the exit. The architect's fleet was close now, their weapons glowing like suns. Elias could feel Vera pushing harder into his mind, showing him Earth from orbit cities, untouched oceans, calm skies, clear, but every thought and dream belonging to him alone. He realized with a cold jolt that she was not lying. This was the choice rule. The galaxy under her shadow, or watch it all burn. Rourke shouted that they had less than a minute before the architects fired on the ship. Elias looked at Kara, then at the device in his hand. Then he did something none of them expected. He pressed the trigger, but at the same time he opened his mind fully to Vera, letting the core signal surge through him. The blast tore through the ship, tearing apart the towers and breaking the network. The overseers staggered and fell, their masks shattering. As light spilled from them, Vera screamed a sound like 1,000 storms, but the signal did not vanish. It flowed into Elias, filling every nerve, every heartbeat. The architects fired a beam of white fire that should have split the ship apart, but it curved around them, bending away, as if the void itself obeyed him. The hangar was filled with silence except for the soft hum inside his skull. The hum of billions of minds connected to him, not enslaved, not free, but waiting. Kara stared at him, her voice barely a whisper, asking what he had done. Elias told her Earth was free from Vera, but now he held the core signal and the architects would think twice before attacking. Rourke looked at him like he was seeing something that was no longer human. In the black void outside the architects' ships, slowed, their weapons dimming as if uncertain. Elias stepped toward the open hangar, his eyes reflecting the burning light of the fleet, his voice carrying far beyond the ship, telling them the war was over and that any who brought harm to Earth would answer to him. The architects did not reply. They turned away, their fleet, vanishing into the dark. Kara stepped closer, her voice trembling, saying, "You saved us." But Elias did not answer because he knew deep down this was not salvation. It was the beginning. The hum in his mind was growing louder, the threads of the signal stretching far beyond Earth, touching worlds and minds. He had never known. He could feel their fear, their confusion, their readiness to obey. He thought of Vera's last words, "You will become what I was." And for the first time he wondered if the universe would one day beg for forgiveness from him, just as it had once from her.